It's first really understanding how data centers function and getting a perspective and view of a data center holistically from top to bottom, from the environmentals inside the data center, how they operate, all the way to the racking and stacking of the environment, and the overall formal handoff to the business and the applications. There's a lot that happens in between that, from the pouring of the concrete slab to that final stage. So it's really understanding where do you see yourself as a fitment, where are the areas of interest just within data center, because your capabilities are so expansive, and you can go in so many different directions. But I would say that the biggest thing is really, again, understanding the concepts of a data center, the network, the security, which is a very crucial point, how the power and cooling works, and building that strong foundation, and then being able to use that foundation to then build yourself a brand. Hi, it's Jack Fagundo, and you're watching the Data Center Go to Market podcast.
Hello, data center professionals. I am Joshua Feinberg from the Data Center Go to Market podcast, and I'm thrilled to have a very special guest here with me today. I'm welcoming Jack Fagundo, who is a consultant and advisor to the C-suite and an expert on data centers. Jack, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you, Joshua. Pleasure being here.
Pleasure's all mine. First place I think would be super helpful to start is if you could walk our viewers, walk our listeners through how you ended up in your current role. Did you always know when you were starting out your career that you wanted to work in data centers? Was this an aspiration that you went to school for? And kind of what was the path that led you to where you are today in your career?
Yeah, interesting enough, the answer to that is no. So I started my career quite some time back, actually, in development and application sustainment. I was working for General Motors as my first official corporate gig. And during that time, I was primarily focused on doing animatronics and robotics development and programming for the assembly lines. And it was through that initiative, the first 7, 8 years of my career, working with robots, I realized, wow, this is really cool, and started to pique an interest in infrastructure. And from the infrastructure component, therefore, I started to get more and more into actual servers and the management of servers and hardware and network equipment. And from that perspective, I grew more and more into how these environments lived. And that actually piqued my interest in the overall data center footprint. And since somewhere of about maybe 2004 or so, I piqued strong interest and moved into specifically data center functions. And that's kind of where I've been at for a while now. Although I do application sustainment still today, and everything that lives in a data center is heavily focused on applications, the goal and for most effort for me is on the data center side.
So what's super interesting about this is you got into infrastructure by starting out in something aligned with robotics. And then here we are 20 years later, and as generative AI and high performance computers become bigger and bigger, we're going to see more of a need for the marriage between robotics and infrastructure and smart cities and edge computing.
Yep, that is correct, Josh. Interesting enough, much more complex back in those days because I was programming in COBOL and BASICs and Visual and C++. Very, very different from what it is today, right? But the concept of being involved with robotics really, really, took me to that next level of infrastructure. And although the plan wasn't necessarily to get into data centers, it was more to continue in the robotics and animatronics world. It just kind of led me there because understanding how the robots operate, obviously the hardware and everything that supports and sustains them lives inside the data center. So it's just a connected tie between the two that pushed me to the data center side.
And then there's even the kind of existential question is, when did the data center really begin? I remember working in the mid-1990s doing enterprise IT support for Merrill Lynch, and we had computer rooms on every floor. And there were servers in there, and there were switches in there, and there was a backbone and everything. But that for sure wasn't the main data set. But it was just so different because most of this was either pre-web or very, very early stages of web. And the whole location operator outsourcing business model, it's probably 20 years now, maybe?
I won't want to reveal my age, even though I'm not that old. But yes, I will say that I remember the days in data center when it was basically reel to reel, copying data from one reel to another reel, or reels playing back operational procedures. It does go far back for me when I first got in. But of course, it was only a very entry level point role at that time, up until now, where it's more executive and leadership and management of overall operations.
So, with that in mind, Jack, what advice would you give to someone that's relatively early on in their career? Maybe they're like a sophomore or junior in college or something like that, and they've heard that there may be some good career options in the data center space. What would you advise someone like that in that kind of role that was coming to you looking for some like informal mentorship?
So I believe that the first step really should be to immerse yourself in the technology, right? When it comes to operations of data centers, within the data center, there's so many different avenues that you can go in. So it's first really understanding how data centers function and getting a perspective and view of a data center holistically from top to bottom, from the environmentals inside the data center, how they operate, all the way to the racking and stacking of the environment and the overall formal handoff to the business and the applications. There's a lot that happens in between that, from the pouring slab to that final stage. So it's really understanding where do you see yourself as a fitment, where are the areas of interest just within data center, because your capabilities are so expansive, and you can go in so many different directions. But I would say that the biggest thing is really, again, understanding the concepts of a data center, the network, the security, which is a very crucial point, how the power and cooling works, and building that strong foundation, and then being able to use that foundation to then build a brand by being able to communicate with stakeholders and understand, those opportunities that may exist for you. And as the innovation continues to improve and evolve, always staying, consistently plugged in to overall, technologies around data center space.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Would your advice be any different for someone that wanted to go into a customer facing role that was more aligned with like on the revenue side, working in like a sales or customer success capacity, or a product manager, or would you largely similar kind of advice?
It's similar. I think the only major difference is depending on the customer and what you're selling, right? If you're selling cloud services to a customer, they don't really care about the data center. They just care about their data, right? So it's really more of understanding the data center and how it operates, so that you can have that intelligent conversation with the customer. But ultimately, the level of conversation that you're having with a customer is different than a conversation that you would have with yourself or your teams, or a role that you're actually applying to when it comes to managing a data center operations. I think holistically, the customers facing aspect of it is more around the business side, and what are the dynamics of how moving to the cloud can help a customer achieve their optimization or financial goals. In some cases, it doesn't necessarily mean that moving to the cloud is financially feasible for a business, but you're able to understand, by having a concept or a footprint on data centers, what it takes to do that, and you're able to more strategically advise a customer on how to position themselves when it comes to moving to a data center. And again, it could be a very simplistic thing as, do you want to do an on-prem versus a full off-prem, or a hybrid model? An off-prem or hybrid model would be different or unique for each customer. Not everybody wears the same shoe. So it's based on their business requirements, GDPR compliance requirements and data requirements and everything else that goes with that business unit. But again, ultimately, I believe that the difference is not much, as you still need to understand the basic foundation. It's just how you pitch that conversation to a customer versus, a role that you're actually playing behind the scenes inside the data center.
So in a lot of ways, everyone ultimately needs to become a consultant to really truly add value. It's just a matter of what level of detail,
Correct.
level of technical expertise to bring to the table, how much they're focused on just business
That is
related
correct.
problems.
Yes.
So that's great for someone that's early on in their career. What about somebody that's mid-career, maybe 10, 20 years into their career, that you worked out maybe in a former job, or that you've known through industry connections or conferences over the years, and you run into them and they're like, Jack, I kind of feel like I'm stuck. I'm in a rut. What should I do next? What would you advise for someone that's looking to get their career back on track, that wants to stay in working in some aspect of the data center ecosystem?
Yeah. So, Josh, that's an interesting question, right? There's one thing that I have learned around the word of consistent, right? The only thing in my view that is consistent is change. In this environment, as it continues to evolve, right, my advice would be to stay adaptable and continually upskill yourself and stay relevant with the current market, economic or market climate. The data center industry, in my point of view, is seeing rapid evolving change as advancements in AI continue to increase. Edge computing and sustainability are starting to take what I would say a forefront for many of the organizations as a primary point of focus, as you've seen with Google and Microsoft. Every conversation, every piece of article, every piece of news that comes out with these big players is around AI and the adoption of AI. And their data centers are evolving around AI. So my best advice to anybody that has been doing this for a while is to stay relevant, embrace long-term, lifelong learning experiences, and make sure that you're always being open to additional roles and responsibilities where you can specialize on certain markets, where you can specialize in a particular career path within this industry. There's many directions that you can go in, as mentioned previously, within the data center space. But you know, just staying relevant by following the trends, such as again AI and what that's what that is doing to the way that we operate, the way that we work, and how the businesses are starting to leverage that technology.
So keeping your skills sharp, being the lifelong learner, constantly reinventing yourself, lots of professional development seems like
That's correct.
a big part of the prescription.
Absolutely, absolutely. It's even, I mean, that applies for myself, right? In order for me to stay relevant, coming out of Google, AI became my world for the most part over the last year, and I learned that direction that we're going in, and we can't fight it, whether or not we try to do something different. The world is pushing us towards that direction. So you have to upskill yourself in that technology if you do want to stay relevant in space.
Fortunately for everyone, this has become very democratized in that there really aren't huge cost barriers anymore. There's fantastic resources with the
Oh yeah.
Google Career Certificates and Udemy. I'm a huge user of like LinkedIn Learning. There's YouTube. There's all kinds of very low cost and in many cases completely free resources. So the cost barrier it certainly takes a lot of the pressure out of that equation. You just show the initiative, and it's like being your own doctor.
Yeah, I completely agree with you on that, Josh. That is the biggest thing is Google and these big companies are spending endless amounts of cash flow on AI, and because they're also building their own technology and building their own chips, um, that is putting a significant increase in demand in the market space. And you've seen, what NVIDIA, for example, is doing from a stock perspective. It's just going through the roof because of the major demand in that space, right? So, yes, I mean, we can't avoid it, unfortunately. And I know that there's a lot of concerns in the market right now around AI, but ethical AI is something that I think is going to catch up a little bit late. First is everybody being pushed towards AI, and then later it's okay. We need to start analyzing the risk a little bit more clear.
So turning our attention now away from just the professional development and thinking more about the role of companies and ecosystems and partners, when you think about the kinds of hyperscalers that you've worked with over the last that you've been blessed to work with over the last several years of your careers, where do you see the biggest opportunities for third-party companies, for channel partners, for integrators, for other people in the ecosystem?
Yeah, very, very interesting question. Again, I'm gonna revert back to my most previous role at Google. So organizations don't have full capabilities inside or in-house to support all aspects of evolving technology, especially as they evolve faster and faster and by the day. What I'm seeing is that there's niche firms, service integrators, or these larger outsourcing providers like TCS, HCL, Cognizant, and so on and so forth. They quickly ramp up and build practices around certain niches and skills based on market demand. Whereas an integrator would potentially do that, a software company like Google probably is more focused on building the technology And their emphasis on what it takes to get the technology from point A to point B. The integrators are actually playing a key and critical role in the deployment and execution of that technology. So in a lot of the work that I did with Google and even other opportunities that I've been in, um, the integrators are normally very closely plugged in. They have exclusive partnerships with these large software companies because the software companies themselves are not necessarily ramping up their skills internally to be able to support consulting services or quickly deliver services to some of their customers. Therefore, they leverage these service integrator organizations or companies to deliver that service for them. And that's what I am seeing. So for the most part, a lot of the deals that I did with Google and Google's customers have a heavy component of leveraging third-party companies or third-party providers to execute those initiatives for them. And I'm not seeing that going away anytime soon. I actually believe that that is starting to increase more and more because these guys have the capabilities. They leverage heavily the offshore model, and they've got the manpower to do that, focus primarily on the execution piece. And they are actually letting organizations like Google or Microsoft develop the technology and just partner with them, right? At the end of the day, that's what I'm seeing from my side. Pretty consistent over the last several years.
The Data Center Go-to-Market podcast is sponsored by DCSMI, elevating the role of sales, marketing, and go-to-market GTM professionals in the growth of the data center industry. To stay informed about upcoming episodes, make sure that you subscribe to the Data Center Sales and Marketing newsletter on the DCSMI website that can be found at www.dcsmi.com. Again, that URL is www.dcsmi.com.
From the standpoint of the team members that would interact with a big hyperscaler like Google Cloud, do you anticipate that much of the daily routine of doing those jobs is going to change much in the next couple of years?
Wow. So this could be just potentially my own point of view, and I want to be careful how I say this. I think it will change for sure. To what extent, I don't know. But then again, I hate to point back to AI. AI is already changing that today. We see AI taking a lot of the mundane task out of the environment, taking those repetitive initiatives, taking all of that automation into a whole new level where you're having, these large language models kind of do a lot of the work that many individuals do on a day-to-day basis. I see a lot of development work being shifted left. I see a lot of, level 1, maybe level 1.5 skill sets in a support environment being shifted left as well, because the AI will eventually take on a lot of those responsibilities. But I do want to be very careful how I say that. I don't want to get beat up by the world here, because it is a very sensitive topic, and a lot of people may or may not agree with me. But this is just again, I'll say it as my own personal observation that yes, there's definitely a change and a disruption in the way that we operate as an organization, or we operate in the current climate.
Do you have any favorite advice for how you'd recommend that somebody future-proof their skills to make sure that they're constantly working on what's coming next, as opposed to getting stuck on what historically the IT industry may have called like legacy projects?
Honestly, no, other than follow the trends, right? I mean, following the current trends that are there are a complete indicative way of understanding what's happening next. We already see where the trends are going. We see that a lot of it, again, I hate to turn this entire conversation into AI, but we see that AI is very much the way to move forward. And I necessarily agree and disagree with both, the concept of AI, because I don't think AI is a one shoe fits all model. But if I think about AI, I think about what cloud used to be, 10, 15 years ago, right? Everybody said cloud and everybody's like, oh, what is cloud? You'd ask 10 people and you get 10 different responses on cloud. Everybody felt cloud was the thing to do because everybody was doing it. I think AI is driving that same behavior today. AI, everywhere you turn on the news, every application, everything you watch on TV, everything is now, even cars, right? Everything is AI driven. Now, does it mean that AI is something that is so drastically different from what it was 4 or 5 years ago? Yes, it has brought a significant amount of relevance to the market. But AI, if you think about it, has been around for a while. We've been doing automation. I mean, if you think about things like, geez, if you think about Google, hey Google, or if you think about Alexa, you think about, Siri, there is AI built into that to some degree, maybe not to the extent of knowledge or I would say smartness that there is today with, larger language models. But that trend is now tripling, quadrupling in scale of speed of deployment, right? And so that is the direction that we're going in. And again, I keep saying to everyone is whether we like the technology, whether we agree with the technology or not, we have to stay relevant in that perspective. We have to stay relevant in upskilling ourselves around AI, generative AI, and how to operate around training of large language models and use cases for our customers. That is going to drive success for our roles and keep us alive, because otherwise you're going to fade out. You're going to fade out with the next AI wave, right? The smarter the AI gets, the less and less you are relevant. So instead of competing against it, learn about it and position yourself in a way where in front of a customer, you can know how to position AI. Because not every customer, not every individual understands it. They understand it like cloud. Cloud, what is cloud? You ask 10 people, 10 answers, right? So AI, you ask 10 people, you'll get 10 different answers. So become that person that the customer can rely on and leverage for, as an expert or as an advisor. Hopefully that makes sense.
Yeah, I spent a lot of time with professional services companies that work with small and medium-sized businesses, like marketing people, accountants, and like for a couple of years now, the basic way of looking at this has been, it's not so much that AI is going to replace marketing jobs. It's a marketer that uses AI is going to replace a marketer that refuses to use AI. It's not so much that AI is going to take over the accountant's job. It's an accountant that uses AI as its co-pilot, that uses AI to augment their work, is the one that's going to steamroll the one who's living in the past.
Yep, completely agree with you, Josh. That's one thing I say constantly is partner with AI, don't fight against it.
Yeah, I look at even just from the kind of work I've done the last 10 or 20 years, we used to hire a lot more copy editing and proofreading.
Right.
Still do that once in a while for really strategic projects, but Grammarly's pretty good.
Exactly.
We used to 25 years ago for businesses that required visiting spaces, people bought books of maps. People bought standalone GPS devices. You know anyone that's buying books of maps or standalone GPS devices anymore? The world changes.
That's true. That is true.
In when you think about your professional responsibilities, how have you seen AI impact like productivity? Are there favorite tools that you use that are AI driven? Has this been a big change over the last 5-6 years, or have you not seen much of a change yet?
So I would say productivity, definitely, right? It goes back to the earlier points. It's changed and it's going to more rapidly change. I still think it's at a very early stage. I mean, you see what's happening with, for example, ChatGPT. They're getting ready to release ChatGPT 5.0, I guess, sometime in the near future. And if you see what the cost is to train that model, it is unimaginably X folds more than it ever has been to train ChatGPT 4. And we already know that ChatGPT 4.0 is pretty smart. And now that they've released additional modules and plugins for it, I think that, in my view, the tools are just getting much, much better. It's becoming so common that your search, at least for me, I'll be honest, a lot of my search now is no longer done in Google or in Bing. I go straight to ChatGPT and I put in a question and I let ChatGPT answer it for me. Or whether I use, Google's platform, I use Bard, right, which was the internal name. At the time, I would use Bard to, do searches on Google versus doing a Google search. I would search for Google responses through its AI tool. And those tools are just becoming so much more intelligent that it just becomes easier. And that's why you're starting to see a lot of the search engines integrate like Microsoft, they're integrating Copilot, right? And same thing with Google search and all of these other, search engines, because the relevance of data is just more precise from what I am seeing by putting it into ChatGPT than it is by going into Google and typing up a search and getting 15 or 20 different responses. And now you're weaving through responses to figure which one is the most accurate. And it ends up leaving you questioning yourself on, is it the first response that I read? Is it the third search engine result that I read that's the right one? Is it the fifth one? Whereas with ChatGPT, you're just getting a direct response, and you can further elaborate into what you're trying to find, and it responds to you in a very fast and accurate manner. Now, is it 100% accurate? Again, no, I don't want to make it sound like it's the God for all, but it sure as heck has gotten a lot better over the last year to year and a half from what I've seen.
Yeah, that even reminds me of the advice that K-12 teachers, especially probably in middle school and high school, would teach students as they're giving them research projects on what a trusted site is, like Wikipedia, WebMD, CNN, trusted. Joe's blog, hobby blog, giving advice about what to do with antibiotics when you have a sore throat. Maybe not so trusted. So yeah, what's very interesting is what used to be a big research project or in a business context, maybe somebody even had an assistant or an intern or someone going out and doing all of this research and aggregating and synthesizing. All the aggregation and synthesizing is being done now by the model making the decisions.
That's correct. That's correct. And the fact that it has the ability to learn from itself and also learn from other neighboring models. I mean, how can you fight it, right?
Yeah. And that's probably the silver lining for a lot of these companies that have been running these projects as lost leaders or hemorrhaging money or whatever you want to call it at the $20 a month price point. If there isn't enough, there clearly are plenty of people that are seeing the shortcomings of the consumer price point and are willing to pay for enterprise offerings. And the enterprise offerings will probably address a lot of the security and compliance concerns that people have had that are preventing deployments.
Yeah, so Josh, you brought up a very good point that I see in the industry. Right now, there's so much being offered for free with ChatGPT and some of these, AI models, right, that are used, those that are used. I strongly believe that this is just kind of like taking a kid to a candy store, right? You get them so interested, and eventually, in order to get candy, you got to pay for it, right? You're gonna have to buy them candy, right? And I really see that these organizations are going to eventually commoditize AI models and commoditize AI services, because the world is going to get so used to using them. It's going to showcase how much it facilitates your day-to-day life, just like anything else. And if you think about it, I would say it's probably the same thing as social media. Before social media, when it first came out, everything was free. Then all of a sudden, you want to use it, you got to pay for it, right? And if you want a better experience, you got to pay for that. And then next thing you know, you're paying for ads or you're watching ads, right? They're going to commoditize the heck out of these platforms, is my point of view. How quick, I don't know, but I think right now they're in a, let's get the world used to this thing, let's get everybody liking it, and then we're going to just pull the trigger on it.
I take the viewpoint too that I want to be optimistic that all the trust and the safety things will be ironed out over time. There was a time 15 years ago where no one in an enterprise IT wanted to trust public cloud.
Exactly.
Today, there's a lot of people that feel strongly that public cloud is more reliable than mediocre configured on-prem.
Exactly. Exactly. I mean, you see what's happening, right? AI today, there's a lot of concerns around risk, security, trust. Give it another 2, 3, 4 years, that'll be out the window. There'll be another concern that comes out. I mean, there's always, I won't say it's 100%. Even today in cloud, a lot of my customers ask questions around the security of cloud, right? But at the end of the day, it's a much more different conversation now than it was 10, 15 years ago. It's not a convincing type of conversation now on why cloud. It's more around, hey, you're going to use cloud. Here's the benefits for it. And by the way, here's the risk against it. And it's up to you as a business to make a decision whether or not you want to use it. I'm not trying to convince you to use cloud anymore. Before, that's what I felt. Now it's very different. With AI, it's the same concept of, hey, we want to push AI into some of our customer base, but there's concerns around, is it safe? Will it expose my data? Will it do this or will it do that? What if my child reads stuff on it that is not supposed to be read, or for him to know about it? There's a lot of risk around it today in the way it's seen. But I think, again, with time, as they get out of the rat race, which right now is how quickly can I push it to the market? I think once it's there, it's kind of like, okay, let's take a step back, and now let's look at the models that we've already deployed and have more consciousness around how do we tying the ends on the loose ends on what we've deployed out as far as AI and AI models. Again, this is my observation. I know the world may not fully agree with, but this has been what I've seen with my customers and conversations that I've held.
Yeah, someone will figure this stuff out. I kind of look at, if you even think about the copyright concerns that major publishers have had with training the models on their content. There was a time 20 years ago when people were vilifying Napster. Apple figured it out. Spotify wouldn't be here today if they hadn't figured out a way to negotiate rights. Hollywood, same issues. They'll eventually figure these things out. And a new model, it'll be a different model, but it'll be figured out.
Yeah, completely agree.
Any parting thoughts on where you think the data center is headed, the data center industry is headed next?
I think it's going to become more demanding requirement, because the concept of running applications is becoming more and more expensive. These large language models, these unique requirements around AI are pushing demand in hardware that the typical average organization can't afford. So the growth in cloud, in my point of view, is going to go further. And if you look at what Google is doing, and I see what Microsoft is doing, I mean, if you go to Microsoft's site, you just go look at their open jobs right now. A lot of it has to do with data center expansion, data center growth, data center build, capacity planning. And this is because the driver is so heavily geared towards moving people to the cloud and using AI, that these big integrators, or I wouldn't call them integrators, but in this particular case, these big software, they have the deep pockets to grow their data center space and data center spends. Whereas the traditional, company doesn't want to get into the owning more assets and investing more in hardware that a year later depreciates, right? So I believe personally that the focus that I see is that the companies are going to start shifting all of their work to the cloud, and eventually start focusing more and more on just their business requirements and business model, right? Let me focus on my business, and I'll let you run my business from an IT perspective. I'll let you host my environments, and I'll let you do everything that I need to do. And by the way, we're going to do it at a much, much more significantly lower cost of ownership than if I was to build my own data centers and have to own all of that hardware and now hire people to run the data centers. You can't provision and deprovision services fast enough as you can do it in the cloud, right? So that's my perception and view, is definitely going to increase. So there's a lot of opportunity, and it's not, don't take my word for it, just go to these job sites and you'll see what I'm talking about.
Yeah, it's always a great way to kind of look at the leading indicators as to what's going on in the job postings, reading the job descriptions, comparing them across different kinds of companies. Great research tool. Jack, for someone that wants to learn a little bit more about you or continue the conversation, what's the best way for someone to get a hold of you? Are you pretty active on LinkedIn?
I am. I'm active on LinkedIn. So I also have a small consulting practice, which you can also find on LinkedIn in my profile. And then all my contact information is also there. If you want to understand a little bit about me in terms of data center and my work, you can follow my website. It's joaquinfagundo.org. Also, as well, in the header of my LinkedIn profile, you should be able to see my website there, where it's all specific to just data center work. But yeah, I mean, that's readily available.
Well, and we'll make sure to caption that into the podcast and include it in the show notes as well. Jack, thanks so much for joining me on the Data Center Go-to-Market podcast. I really appreciate you so generously sharing all of your hard-earned insight and knowledge that you picked up over the years working in the data center and hyperscale and cloud space before it even was widely known in the industry. This has been super insightful. I really appreciate it.
Thank you, Josh. I appreciate the opportunity of being able to, join your podcast and share this info.
My pleasure. Take care now, Jack.
Same to you. Thank you.
The Data Center Go-to-Market podcast is sponsored by DCSMI, elevating the role of sales, marketing, and go-to-market GTM professionals in the growth of the data center industry. To stay informed about upcoming episodes, make sure that you subscribe to the Data Center Sales and Marketing newsletter on the DCSMI website that can be found at www.dcsmi.com. Again, that URL is www.dcsmi.com.